Hi everyone, I am at the Florida Healthcare Summit. I'm going to turn the camera to my special guests who are Kevin Zeese, Margaret Flowers. How you doing, guys?
We're doing great. Appreciating
Surprised
the
to see you out here.
Yeah, I know. Imagine I walked in and there you were sitting in the lobby. Okay, so Margaret, you were on my show talking about single-payer health care because you are on the board of Physicians for a National Health Program, and you were one of my heroes for disrupting Max Baucus's Senate Finance Committee back in, I guess it was 2009,
right.
To ask why single payer was not on the table, and you actually left your practice as a doctor to be an activist full-time. Why don't you tell us why you're here today, the panel that you're going to be talking about that I'm not going to be able to cover, but give people an idea of what you're going to be saying.
Sure. So I gave one workshop already this morning. It was on National Improved Medicare for All, talking about H.R. 676 in the House and Senator Sanders' bill S1804, and talking about basically how we're going to win National Improved Medicare for All. I think what's important for activists to understand is that we've kind of won the battle of ideas. There is widespread support for a National Improved Medicare for All. But what we need to win now is for people to understand that we actually have the power to win this at the national level. I think people are feeling disempowered, but we know from a long history of social movements and how transformation occurs that when we organize and mobilize to fight for this at the national level, then and only then are we going to win healthcare for everyone and solve the healthcare crisis in the U.S. This afternoon I'll be talking about state efforts and some of the barriers that states experience with trying to get closer to universal coverage.
Well, since we're not going to be able to cover that, you want to just list some of those for us right now?
Sure. Well, basically it's not, because of the federal laws that we have, it's not possible for a state to actually create a pure single-payer healthcare system, and so states are not able to capture the bulk of the savings that one would gain from a pure single-payer system. And so I think it's important when we have those efforts at the state level to try to increase coverage and try to get some efficiencies, that we be honest about it being a multi-payer system and not being able to get that savings, because if the state system is successful in getting passed and implemented, we can anticipate that there will be some difficulties with funding it. States have to balance their budgets, and so we don't want the message to be single payer doesn't work. We want people to understand that that's why we need a national system. So some of the barriers are Medicare. In order for a state to take over Medicare, they would have to get a change in federal law. They would have to get Congress to pass a law allowing the state to take over Medicare. There are other components of the healthcare system, like the Veterans Administration, that you would have to get a federal approval to take over that system. And then things like the Federal Employees Health Benefits Plan program, which is about 200 different insurance plans. You would have to get some sort of change in federal law to be able to, replace that with a state system. So those are really high hurdles that I'm not sure states would be able to overcome. But I think one of the biggest ones is probably ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which was a law passed in 1974 that says that states cannot regulate, businesses that self-insure. And about 60% of businesses that provide insurance to their employees are self-insured. And so there have been a number of court cases in recent years that have been very unfavorable for states that have tried to make changes that would impact businesses' health benefits, and so that doesn't set a very good precedent for us in that regard. So these are some of the barriers that exist. I know that states are talking about ways to do workarounds around them, but those workarounds, while they might cause some improvement in efficiency, they are still going to be, and we're not sure though, because they may also add more layers of administration. They're not going to get the bulk of the savings that we need in a single payer system. And I know one thing that people are hearing about is that Hawaii as a state has a waiver to the ERISA law. And that's because that actually happened around the time that the law was passed in 1974. Prior to the ERISA law, Hawaii passed it's called a Prepaid Health Act that requires certain businesses to provide health insurance to their employees, and so when ERISA was passed, they were able to get a carve-out from that ERISA, but no other state has gotten that.
Well, that's an interesting one, because some of the things that I heard you saying relate to California. You know, the federal waiver. I know one thing that Ryan Skolnick, who is a single-payer activist, has told me is that they can't deny a waiver if it's going to be revenue neutral.
That's to the ACA. That would be a waiver to the Affordable Care Act. The language that, because the state would also have to get a waiver. There are a number of waivers. They have to get Medicaid waivers, and they would have to get a waiver allowing them to be exempt from having a health insurance exchange.
Yeah. Well, I'm not as versed in the policy as you are, so I can't really ask the most intelligent questions. I like to focus on the activism, and for that, I'm going to move over to my friend Kevin here,
Hey, how
who
are you?
is the activist extraordinaire.
Thank you.
We actually met in person at an Occupy the NEC action with Jill Stein, actually, back, when was that? 2011.
2011, yes.
Yeah, and you also had started Occupy Washington, D.C., which was the October, what was it called?
October 2011.
October, we started organizing the Occupy in Washington, D.C. when the Arab Spring went on, and they did their occupations based on date when the actual event. So we called it Occupy October 2011 until Occupy came into vogue, and we changed it to Occupy Washington, D.C. But it was the same concept. Occupy a public space, put our issues out, organize regular protests, and you make ourselves heard, make ourselves so we can't be ignored.
Okay, well, since we're talking about Occupy, I was part of Occupy LA.
Yeah.
Why do you think Occupy fizzled? I mean, I don't think it's a failure. I think we clearly changed the national conversation from the phony issue of the deficit. You'll remember Obama's
Deficit Commission.
Right, the Simpson-Bowles Commission,
Right,
which
right.
we called the Cat Food Commission because it
Right,
would involve
right.
seniors eating cat food if it passed. So changing it from that phony issue to income inequality, which then Bernie Sanders picked up and ran with. But what do you think, just off the top of your head, were some of the problems with the Occupy movement?
Well, first off, I think Occupy played exactly the role it's supposed to play in social movement development. There's a really interesting analysis of how social movements succeed, and it's called The 8 Stages of Social Movements by an activist named Bill Moyer, who worked with Martin Luther King, who was active in the anti-nuclear movement. In fact, wrote the first draft from a jail when he was arrested protesting nuclear weapons, nuclear energy. Occupy's role was the takeoff, stage 4 of the 8 stages of successful social movements. The takeoff, people rise up and it's like, wow, where'd that come from? It's amazing. All these people are concerned about these issues. And then that's followed by, of course, a landing when people say, where'd that go? What happened? But that's a natural step. And what happened was what you started to describe. We put new issues on the agenda. In fact, we were looking in our closet to clean up our house a little bit and found some old Occupy Washington Post newspapers that was published during Occupy Washington, D.C. And so many issues that we're finding out about today. Living wage, Black Lives Matter, youth debt. I mean, issue after issue that are now developing in movements of their own, were all being raised by Occupy. And that's what the takeoff phase does. It raises issues, lets people know they're not alone, brings people together into a movement, and then as the people get into it further, into stage 6 of which stage we're in right now, of the 8 stages of successful social movements, then the issues get more complex and deeper. And you see individual movements grow, whether it's the Fight for 15, the Our Walmart protests that occurred, the Black Lives Matter protests that occurred, the school tuition fights, the overall tuition fights, the Federal Reserve argument issues. There's so many issues that came out of Occupy that are now building and growing. We have so many more people involved in protest movements, in resistance movements now than we had during Occupy. It was the takeoff. But now we're in the phase of national consensus, building national consensus. And one of those issues is the healthcare issue we're talking about today. We are building national consensus around national improved Medicare for all. That's the goal. That's the language. National improved Medicare for all. Every one of those words matter. And what we're seeing now is almost 90% support among Democrats. We're seeing majority support among Republicans. We're moving toward in the high 60s to 70% support nationally. That's going to get into the high 80s support not too far into the future. And various people play a role in this. The Sanders campaign did a great job in elevating the issue. as part of their campaign. And we'll see more of that in the 2018 and 2020 elections as more people respond to the political transformation that the movement is creating. Politicians of all parties, we'll start seeing Republicans coming out after their absurd attempts to lessen people's coverage by the repeal of the ACA, which has a lot of problems, which needs some, needs to be replaced. The Republican approach actually was making things worse. And so you're going to see, even among Republicans, support for national improved Medicare for all.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear you giving Bernie Sanders' movement some credit, because I remember when he first announced, you and I were arguing on Facebook, and you were still suspicious of me. You always thought I was an agent of the Democratic Party.
I still do.
Even though I exited.
I still do.
And you told me that Bernie was going to just, sheep herd people into the party.
And he did.
Only to tell them to vote for Hillary.
And he did.
Yeah, but I said to you, but he was going to start a movement. It was my job to capture those people that learned about the movement and the issues of the movement that would not have been engaged had there not been a presidential campaign. But moving aside that, I'm now going to go back to Margaret. Because I have to go back to. I just noticed I don't have my battery. So I don't want to. Yeah, hold on, wait a second. Am I just seeing myself right now? Wait, did I flip the camera and it's just me now? Hold on, let me see. Okay, now I'm back to Margaret. Great. Okay, so Margaret, speaking of Bernie Sanders, another thing that. Why is this doing this? It keeps switching. Me.
It gets too hot out here.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem.
Right. Another thing that Kevin has educated me on is that Bernie Sanders' bill, I forget the number, 1804 in the Senate, is not a true Medicare for all bill.
No, it's not true.
Well, it is a true Medicare for all bill, which you guys take a lot of credit for making sure that he didn't do lowering the Medicare age, eligibility, public option. You were very good with that, but you're still saying that it is not as good as H.R. 676. For my viewers, can you expound on that?
Sure, that is true. We had been pushing Senator Sanders to introduce a companion bill in the Senate that was just like H.R. 676, and he made a decision, even though we asked him not to try to weaken the bill up front in order to gain more Democratic co-sponsors when it was introduced. We asked him to introduce a very strong bill, and then we would do the work of pushing senators to endorse it. And so in the last few weeks, some of the things that were jettisoned, one is that he allows for-profit providers to remain.
This was in the last few weeks before he introduced it.
Yeah, the last few weeks before he introduced it, sorry. He allowed for-profit providers to remain in the system without any types of budgetary controls. So basically, now they have a guarantee if it were to pass, these kidney dialysis, private kidney dialysis centers and other for-profit facilities would have a guaranteed payer through the government and no ability to actually rein them in so that they're not overcharging or overtreating or things like that. A couple of things that were in from the beginning that remained and that we had criticized. One is leaving out long-term care. So long-term care is health care, and millions of people in the United States depend on it. Certainly people when they are older often do, but people at all ages depended on long-term care, as well as families with children that have chronic health problems may depend on it. And right now, Senator Sanders' bill leaves that in Medicaid. So in order to qualify, if people don't have the money to pay for this long-term care, which is expensive, they have to basically spend down their assets and live in poverty in order to qualify.
I asked Adam Gaffney about that when he spoke at the DSA Los Angeles meeting last week, and he said that was done because long-term care is so expensive. The bill would be a non-starter if that was included in there.
Well, I think that's not the movement's role to compromise. It's the movement's role to say what it is that we need. And what we heard immediately from people in the communities that depend on long-term care was they were outraged. They don't see it as a Medicare for all bill if it doesn't include them. We have to recognize that families are living in keeping themselves in poverty. Young people are not working because if they do, they won't be able to qualify for the care that they need.
And the one problem with Gaffney's comment, we're already paying for long-term care through Medicaid.
Right.
So it's already an expense. You're shifting that expense into a better system. national improved Medicare for all. So I think that's an excuse you can make for Sanders, but it's a false excuse.
Yeah.
We need the least expensive way to do this is to include it in Medicare for all, improve Medicare for all by including long-term care. Stop making families destitute. That's not helpful for the economy.
Exactly.
That's not helpful for the families.
Right.
You undermine the economy, you undermine families, you undermine health by not including long-term care.
We know too many young people who literally have to keep their income down in order to continue to be able to qualify for the care that they need, and that's ridiculous. That hurts us as a country. Another important piece is the 4-year transition period. It's a very complicated 4-year transition period, which basically creates a couple of new systems, and there's a buy-in to Medicare, including Medicare Advantage. And when we look at that 4-year thing, it's going to be very expensive, and it's going to be complicated. It's going to divide people. There are going to be issues with it, and those issues will be used to undermine the whole system and say this isn't going to work. And so it's just inviting an opportunity for the system to fail in the end.
Well, it also invites an opportunity for lobbyists.
Right.
Look at the pushback the insurance and pharmaceuticals and all had against the ACA.
Right.
You would see a much bigger pushback against National Improved Medicare for All, and giving them 4 years to stop it from being implemented is a terrible mistake by Senator Sanders. Terrible mistake.
When we created Medicare and Medicaid in 1965, there was no Medicare or Medicaid system. In an age of no computers, we created a new system. Medicare was a new national system, and 19 million seniors were enrolled in it without computers in 1 year. So every other country, when they've gone to universal health care, they went to universal health care. They had a planning period. They decided how to do it, and then on a certain day, the system started. That way, everyone is in the same system at the same time, and if there are glitches, then we all have an incentive to make it work instead of dividing us and pitting us against each other.
All right, well, let me mention to you that no matter how perfect the bill was, let's say it is a perfect bill, we worked very hard. I personally worked on several Congress members, supposedly Democratic progressives, Congress members in Los Angeles, to get them to sign on to co-sponsor 676. And we know 2 of our corporate neolibs, who I call Bought Booker and Counterfeit Kamala, because I like to make alliterative hashtags, signed on to Bernie Sanders' bill because they see themselves as presidential contenders in 2020. But one thing I will tell you is that even if you author a bill, like Ricardo Lara in California, even if you push it through the Senate, like Kevin De Leon, who is now running against Feinstein, even if you say you've been supporting it for your whole life, like Nancy Pelosi, even if you say you've been supporting it for 20 years, like Anthony Rendon, who shelved our bill in the Rules Committee, even if you have all those people on your side going for the perfect bill, and I know you have issues with SB 562, or not so much the bill, but going state by state, that will be my final question to you. Even if you have the perfect bill, you talk about what happened with Medicare in the 60s. That was before. You've seen the film Heist. So you know what's happened with think tanks, with K Street, with regulatory capture, with right-wing radio. That was before all that. How do you possibly think that with the outsized influence of money in politics, with Citizens United, with the McCutcheon decision, with Buckley versus...
You're so defeatist.
Well, this is my job. This is my job
That's the defeatist mentality that hurts us.
No, but
give a response.
This is my interviewer role, not my activist role. My activist role, I'm out there protesting those guys.
No, and this is what people are thinking, and this is why I say it's not a matter of convincing the most of us that we need a national improved Medicare for all. It's convincing us that we actually have the power to win it. And I think we look at some of the recent fights that we've had trying to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership, going up against multinational corporations, negotiations that were conducted in secret, very aggressive administration pushing it, and we were able, without a lot of resources, activists coming together across the country on a wide range of issues and using alternative media and other creative ways to educate ourselves and others, and then hounding our members of Congress, doing actions at their offices. You did an excellent, and one of my favorite actions from that whole period was when you outsourced Becerra, Xavier Becerra.
That was a fun one.
And people were sitting in their members of Congress's offices for days and weeks, and we shifted that political tide where by 2016 election, all of the politicians were having to run against it.
Even Hillary Clinton had to run against
And
it.
even Rob Portman, who was a
Former
former
trade
trade rep, a Republican from Ohio. And that's what it is. When we organize together and we build this movement of movements, healthcare really does impact everything. We're very clear and we're willing to escalate our campaigns and put that pressure on them. Then and only then are we going to win. This is not going to happen until we do that. With those lobbyists, we can be sure that until we make this a clear demand, draw this line, it's not going to happen. And I appreciate Senator Sanders introducing the legislation. I don't want people to think that I don't appreciate him doing that. What I'm saying to activists is that we have to push him, and he said he wants to be pushed. We have to push him to improve that legislation because we need to start off with the strongest bill that we can. We know that bills only get weaker. They don't usually get stronger as they go through the process. And so we have to be very clear, and the next time he introduces it, we have to say, you got to have these things in it.
We can't start from the position of it's impossible. We have to start from the position that we can change the political culture so it becomes inevitable.
Right.
And
yeah.
we start from the position of strength, demanding what we want, not negotiating against ourselves
Yeah.
to satisfy a corporate,
Well, that's what
criminal like
Obama did.
Cory Booker.
That's what Obama did. Well, let
Well,
me just,
Obama didn't do that either.
Well-
no, Obama sold us out.
Yeah.
ACA was a gift to the insurance industry.
Right, of course,
It did
we know.
nothing about pharmaceutical prices.
Yeah.
It did not solve our problem at all.
Yeah, he did nothing about right to work laws. He did nothing
Right.
about
I'm talking about healthcare. Even on healthcare. Even on
employee
healthcare.
card check.
Yeah,
I'm
he's
saying
not been a friend
we're
of
not
labor
gonna,
either.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about Obama, but I want to
Just
push.
responding to you.
I'm going to push back on TPP because I really feel that Hillary, I caught this. A lot of people didn't catch this. Joel Benenson, her chief strategist, was
Yes.
interviewed on Lawrence O'Donnell, and Lawrence asked him point blank, would she get out of it or would she renegotiate it? And he clearly said she would renegotiate it. So here's the thing.
no,
I
we know the
believe-
battle continues.
I believe that Trump, that was the one good thing that Trump did. I think Trump did it because he didn't, not that he cared about anything that he said, because he doesn't have the attention span of a flea, but because Jeff Sessions was against the TPP, and Jeff Sessions was one of his chief advisors. Now, I don't want to argue this point because, again,
Jeff Sessions was against because there was a movement that said that undermines our sovereignty. TPP
That's
was
the right-
opposed.
that's the right
TPP
way.
was opposed from the right to the left.
Yeah.
And that's why Sessions opposed it.
Yeah.
And
We
that's-
made him oppose
But
it.
that's it. That's
did?
the point.
The movement did.
No,
Our
not us
movement?
personally,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but we
The movement
changed
did.
that political culture that made it so unpopular, and Trump saw that as a way to
Get votes.
get votes in the Rust Belt by communities that have been devastated by agreements like NAFTA. So it was, again, the movement creates the wave. Politicians ride that wave. The movement never gets credit for the work that they did to create the wave. But that's the same thing with Senator Sanders. It's interesting how we hear so many people saying, wow, Senator Sanders created the Medicare for All movement.
It's so silly.
But that movement has been going on
Right.
for decades, and that was an issue that
He rode the wave.
Right.
okay, your cousin Paul Song is watching right now.
Hey, Paul,
Paul.
how you doing?
Paul, for people who don't know, is the co-chair of a campaign for a healthy California. My last and final question to Kevin and Margaret is going to be, and you can have a rebuttal point in here if you want to put it in the comments there, Paul. They are saying that going with state by state, even though that's how Canada did it, with Saskatchewan
Oh,
first.
gosh.
Yeah, he's rolling his eyes there. Is not the way to go. That we should be going with the federal bill. So it's your soapbox, guys.
If it was 1965 and we didn't have 7 federal laws that didn't exist then, but now exist to prevent a single-payer program at the state level, 7. If we didn't have in 1965, it would make sense to go state by state and like Canada. Maybe that would make sense, like Canada did. But now you have 7 federal laws that require either waivers from HHS or from other agencies, or a law passed by Congress to change a federal law to allow a state to use that law, that money for its state single payer. You can't get single payer. And so the best you get if you pass a state law is another state insurance program to hopefully cover more people. That's the goal. But it goes side by side with what already exists. And so it gets more complicated, more bureaucratic rather than less. The only solution is national improved Medicare for all. I wish someone had told us this years ago when we were working for state single payer. Now we know it's true. When you go through these federal laws, I don't see how you're going to get the federal government to take away from people in the military and retired veterans
and federal employees.
out of their healthcare system, where they get to choose from insurance companies. I don't know how you get federal employees laws changed to allow that we can now allow to choose from 200 insurance plans. I don't know how you can get ERISA changed, which allows corporations to set up their own insurance that they profit from. And Medicare, going after changing Medicare, which would require federal law. It's not done by a waiver, by the way, for the kind of change we need. It would require a change in federal law that would risk the future of Medicare. The bipartisan Congress, the Democrats hide it, the Republicans are open about it, they want to destroy Medicare. They want to make it into a voucher system where we pay for health insurance. If you go after Medicare to allow it to be used for single payer at the state level, what prevents a state like Florida that we're in, or Texas, or Alabama, or Arkansas, these conservative states, from allowing it to be put into a waiver program of the state? And destroy Medicare state by state. I don't even think it's a good idea for us to look for a waiver for Medicare. And so I think it'd be counterproductive. We need to focus, like in Florida right now, here we are. We need to get this congressional delegation, Republican and Democrat, to support national improved Medicare for all. Spending time in Tallahassee trying to pass a state law that just becomes another complicated health insurance system next to the existing system is not the right path. It's where Nancy Pelosi tells us, do it at the state level. Why? Because she doesn't want the pressure. We need to pressure Nancy Pelosi, who claims she supports single payer, to actually do national improved Medicare for all. There's 121 co-sponsors of HR 676, the highest number ever.
Thanks to activists like you and
Thanks
others
to
around
lots
the
of
country.
activists.
Yeah.
We need to keep building that. We need to break through and get Republicans to support. This is not a Democrat issue. It's not just a progressive Democrat issue. We even have some blue dog Democrats supporting it. We need to get this a system that cannot be denied no matter where you are, just like with TPP.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can read Paul's comment, because he says, "Oh shoot."
Oh shoot!
It's so sunny. It's so
sound like
sunny
Paul.
out here.
That's
I
very
agree
hard.
that
It's very
it
hard.
starts by state is not ideal and would prefer a federal program. It is extremely challenging and difficult, but California is the 6th largest economy in the world. At least it is a large enough battleground to
Yeah, so
educate
just a
people,
couple
I
of
guess.
things. So
It's good for educating people, but it's miseducating in some ways.
So one thing is, people should understand that in Canada in the 1960s, there were several decades of provinces experimenting with socializing their healthcare. Healthcare was done at the provincial level then. There was a federal program already in existence that gave 100% hospital coverage at the provincial level. They already provided 100%
As a federal law.
as a federal program, and so moving from there to 100% coverage was not a big step. Saskatchewan was the first province to take that step of going to 100% coverage, and then they realized that it made a whole lot more sense to do it at the federal level. And there was a strong movement in Canada. There was also a movement against it. I'm sad that the doctors were part of that movement against it. So it was a very different environment. They actually had enabling legislation, not blockading legislation at the state level. So I understand that some people think that they need to work at the state level because it's more local. Just be honest about it. Don't call it single payer. Don't call it Medicare for all. Call it an effort to get a universal health care system. And then recognize that without a national organized movement, we're not going to win national. So it's a question for activists of where to put their resources.
And when it fails, if you call it single payer, like Vermont, single payer. Vermont never had a single payer plan, but it's called it was always a multi-payer plan. But when VAR fails, single payer failed. When Colorado failed, single payer failed.
Even
When New
though
York
they weren't.
failed, even though none of them were single payer, because we called it that, people called it that. We need to stop that lie.
Right,
You
right.
can't have single payer at the state level without 7 federal laws being effective.
Okay. Now, I was very fortunate to be able to spot these two guys coming into the hotel, and we have content here that cannot be seen anywhere else except on Lauren Steiner's The Robust Opposition. So if you are not already following me on Facebook, please do. So from Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, Florida, this has been Lauren Steiner reporting for The Robust Opposition from the Florida first annual ever Healthcare Summit.